Peace be with you, sisters and brothers. Share with me a reflection for the 30th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Yere, October 19, 2023. Our readings are from the book of Exodus, chapter 22, verse 20 to verse 26. The first letter of St. Paul to the Thessalonians, chapter 1, verse 5 to verse 10. And the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 22, verse 34 to verse 40. I entitled the reflection, Two Sides of the Same Coin. Let us begin with the Gospel. The setting of the Gospel passage is the temple precincts in Jerusalem, where Jesus had already arrived to celebrate the Passover. And keep in mind, the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. So his presence already caught the attention of the establishments, the political establishment and the Jewish religious authorities. More so because he had gone to the temple to chase away those who were buying and selling, disrupted what you might call the routine practices they were engaged with, offering animals for temple sacrifices. So the groups were coming one after the other to test him with questions to see if he can stumble to any of them, and they would now hold something against him to get rid of him. So the first group that came last week were two unlikely allies, the Pharisees and the Herodians. Because they see Jesus as a common enemy, they now came with a question bordering on political economy, paying of taxes. Jesus called for the coin for the tax, whose head image was on it. They answered, and he made the classic comment about giving to Caesar what belonged to Caesar and to God what belongs to God. So that was last week. Actually, in the chronology, if we read the 22nd chapter of Matthew, the next group that came were the Sadducees. Remember this joke about the Sadducees? They were sad because they didn't believe in the resurrection, and they brought true to their nature a question about resurrection. And that was why this reading started when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees. They now got together and put a question to disconcert him. What question did they put to him? One of them asked, which is the greatest of the commandments of the law? The law is also known as the Torah. And the Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And from these books, the Jews gleaned 613 commandments from them. So it became unwieldy for people. 365 of those were prohibitions, things that they were prohibited from doing. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, for example. Then 248 of those were prescriptions. Thou shalt, positive commandment, thou shalt honor your father and your mother. Thou shalt observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And these laws cover a breadth of subjects. For example, it covered issues like food, dress, slaves, the poor, property, feast days, worship, sacrifices, punishment to crime, and so on. So, which of these laws is the greatest? So, a very valid question. In fact, it reminds us of two rabbis who were contemporaries of Jesus. When a Gentile came to them, Rabbi Shammai and Rabbi Hillel, the question of the Gentile was, can you summarize the whole of the Torah while I'm standing on one leg? So I don't want a long-winded answer. Give me the summary in a capsule, as it were, easy to swallow. And one of the rabbis, Rabbi Shammai, chased the man away. But Rabbi Hillel took up the challenge and said, what is hurtful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole of Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. So it's similar to the question, what the Pharisee asked Jesus today. And Jesus also took his answer from the Torah. The first arm of the answer was from the book of Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is called the Shema, the daily prayer, daily liturgy of the Jewish people. And the second is taken from the book of Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So that's why we have our title, two sides of the same coin. One side, love of God, the other side, love of neighbor. So the two cannot be separated, because we cannot rightly say that we love God without loving our neighbor. We do not see God, but we can see God on the faces of our neighbors. So Jesus struck that careful balance between the two. God first, then our neighbor second. But using the self, the love of our neighbors ourselves has some bit of difficulty, but the self cannot be an objective measure of love, because we have people who do self-harm. They just use a razor blade and cut their body. We find this mainly in the Western world. We have people who commit suicide, those who have suicidal thoughts. So that can be an objective measure of love. And that is why Jesus now changed the commandment and say, a new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you. John chapter 13, verse 34. So Jesus' love is the agape, and that's different from any other type of love. And we have types of love indeed. There is the storge, love between family members, parents and their children, children and their parents. There is the philia, the friendship, warm relationships. There is the eros, the root word of erotic. That's the passionate love that has a selfish end. And then the agape, that selfless love, that benevolence, that willingness to do good to the other person. So in order to express this love, we have the other readings to complement the gospel passage in the way that love becomes now a virtue that should be shown to God first, as we see in the letter to the Thessalonians, Paul helping us to appreciate that dimension of love. He praised the Thessalonians for their positive action in accepting to live in the joy of the Holy Spirit and in getting rid of idolatrous worship. So they were now expressing love of God. Then the first reading from the book of Exodus, we see the other dimension of love of neighbor, when the people of Israel were enjoined to show love to the vulnerable in society, the poor, the widow, the orphan, those left at the margins of society. So our love must therefore show itself in concrete terms. There's this story about John the Evangelist. When he became old and cannot write sermons anymore, he was coming and would be saying, little children in the church, love one another. Little children, probably with his staff, love one another. And someday, somebody asked him, why do you repeat yourself all the time, saying the same thing? Little children, love one another. And he said, my dear friends, if you do that, you do enough. And it is from John that we have this message. My dear people, since God has loved us so much, we too should love one another. 1 John chapter 4, verse 11. Thank you for listening. God bless you.